Hey, what's up, everyone? Today I'm going to be reviewing some direct to streaming horror movies, particularly in the sci fi horror and post apocalyptic horror genres. And I was initially planning to put these on our Halloween slate of movie reviews, but didn't get a chance to get to them, so wanted to review them now and ask the question, are these worth your time? Because they are low budget, more B horror movie fare, and some of them really lean into the cheesiness. And the most important thing are they fun? Yeah, are they entertaining? Do they deliver on the cheesiness and the over the top entertainment that I personally seek in a B horror movie? So without further ado, let's dive into these reviews. First on the list is Operation Blood Hunt, a new werewolf horror period piece directed by Louis Mandylor. You also have Jonathan Rhys-Meyer in a supporting role as the character of Murphy. Then you have leading the film and the cast Quentin Rampage Jackson as the Reverend. I just want to say that I found the trailer for this movie kind of fun, and it just like marketed itself as this cheesy werewolf horror movie. Yeah, I'm down with that. So I was like, hell yeah, I'll check this out. So I guess the question is, was it a good time? Was it fun? Let's start with the characters and the cast, beginning with the Reverend, who is this old school style action hero. Jackson definitely has that retro vibe and screen presence that is a throwback to those 80s action heroes and icons, and that's kind of cool, except for the fact that I didn't find he had much charisma that he brought to the table, and his performance for me just barely registered as a performance, and I think that was partially due to the fact that his character is frequently sidelined by Jonathan Rhys-Meyer's character, Murphy, who is often chewing up the scenery with his ham-fisted performance. Speaking of Myers, it often feels like he thinks he's in some kind of Shakespearean drama in certain scenes, bringing on the tears and the emotions, and just felt completely out of place in a cheese fest werewolf movie. Turning now to the special effects, I found the werewolf designs and costumes pretty cheesy as expected. They're supposed to be intentionally silly and goofy. They looked like knockoff versions of the Lycans in the Underworld series to me, except for the fact that they have these disproportionately cartoonishly large heads in comparison to their small bodies. Whenever you get a full body shot of the werewolves, they look like little toddlers with these oversized heads, but they're supposed to be taller than the human characters, but you just didn't get that sense of scale conveyed because of their big heads. They just look little. Also, another weird creative choice I found was that you have some female werewolves, but whenever they transform into a werewolf, they don't have any like kind of feminine characteristics, and they still have, these masculine barrel chests, which was just kind of an odd creative choice. I would think if you have female werewolves, they would have some distinguishing characteristics, but I guess not in this. So yeah, the werewolf designs and effects were just, not cool at all. I mean, I don't expect them to be convincing, but at least be kind of cool and fun to watch. Like in Dog Soldiers, another werewolf movie and a really fun action horror movie. And yeah, the effects in Dog Soldiers are really cheesy, but they're cool, they're fun, they're badass. There's nothing badass about the effects in this movie or the action scenes. The action scenes are very choppily edited. There's even not a lot of gore. They're not over the top at all, and this film just didn't deliver on that level of campiness. And then it also brings in some kind of like backstory with the Quentin Jackson character and his dad, which was just disposable and forgettable. Very forgettable. I would not recommend this. Yeah, just don't waste your time with it. I mean, I wanted it to be a fun, like, midnight feature just to put on and turn your brain off, but it was just, what a waste of time. If you want to watch a good B werewolf movie, horror movie, watch Bad Moon, which I think came out in 1996. That actually features a really cool werewolf costume and design, good gore, even a better story than this one. Next up, we have VHS Beyond, the latest installment of the VHS franchise, which has gained quite a cult following. This one dives into the subgenre of sci-fi horror, one of my favorite horror subgenres, so I was very excited to see what they would do with the stories here. This one delivers 6 more fear-inducing stories, all by different directors, and wrapped around a frame narrative of alien abduction. Like I said, there are 6 stories total, and that includes the frame narrative, but I'm going to focus primarily on the 5 main short films. The first one, titled Stork, is directed by Jordan Downey. It involves a rogue police unit that stumbles upon a house of horrors while investigating a string of baby disappearances. This first story very heavily situates itself in the action horror subgenre. It also brings in elements from the zombie apocalypse genre as well, and has a nice video game-esque first-person shooter style to some of the action sequences, which are pretty well done and fun to watch. Speaking of the action, this story has the most action of any of the stories in the anthology. I will say that it doesn't bring in many aspects of sci-fi or sci-fi horror up until the end, where it really starts leaning into those elements of the sci-fi horror genre, and takes everything in a very bizarre, somewhat cartoonish, but still terrifying direction that I didn't expect, and found very enjoyable and entertaining. So I had fun with this first story. The second story, titled Dream Girl, is directed by Virat Paul. The story involves 2 paparazzi who sneak into the set of a rising Bollywood music star, only to pay the ultimate price for their trespassing. I thought this story built up a pretty creepy atmosphere around this music star, Tara, but then by the second half, it goes completely off the rails, becomes really cartoonish and cheesy in a way that I had a mixed reaction to, honestly. On the level of the campiness, it was entertaining, but then on a different level, I thought that the story may have benefited by exercising a little more restraint in the first 2/3 to build up more to that explosion of visceral horror. It ended up not being one of my favorite episodes, but, still kind of fun. The third story is titled Live and Let Dive, directed by Justin Martinez. The story involves a skydiving trip that turns into a struggle for survival when the skydiver's plane collides with an alien spacecraft. This was one of my favorite stories of the entire anthology. I also think the premise of an alien invasion obviously aligned more with the theme of sci-fi horror, which was the central concept for this anthology. So yeah, it worked on that level. Also featured, I think, one of the best or the best action set piece of the entire anthology, when the skydivers are falling helplessly from this burning plane trying to dodge alien ships, and also actual alien creatures trying to hunt them down. And so the escalation of this story and episode is pretty good. It keeps upping the ante and escalating and ramping things up, and was enthralling and thrilling and fun, and also funny at times unexpectedly. So definitely well done, and as I said, ranks as one of my favorite episodes in this anthology. The fourth story, titled Fur Babies, is directed by Christian and Justin Long. The plot involves these animal rights activists who try to expose this unethical doggy daycare owner, Becky. Right off the bat, I'll say that this was my least favorite episode in the entire anthology. It was trying to be this horror comedy and bring this satirical edge into the mix that just fell flat and didn't have any bite. But yeah, just the humor and the horror comedy element just didn't work and fell flat. It's a tough to, blend those two together and do it in a way where you retain the edginess of the horror, but also the edginess of the humor. and one doesn't deflate the other. And I thought this episode wasn't able to quite do that and maintain that balance. The fifth and final story, Stowaway, is directed by Kate Siegel and written by Mike Flanagan. The story involves a UFO reporter who investigates strange lights hovering above the Mojave Desert. This final story is just dripping with existential dread and Lovecraftian horror, and definitely ranks as my favorite story in the entire anthology. I also think it's one of the best things that Mike Flanagan has ever written, and is definitely the reason to check out this anthology. If you skip the rest of the stories and just watch this one, I do think it's worth your time. The other ones are fine. Some of them, as I've said, are better than others, and in certain cases the execution falls short. And I also think in the previous stories, they don't always convey that central concept of sci-fi horror that, was promised in this anthology. But this one definitely delivers. Finally, I'm going to review the post-apocalyptic horror movie Azrael, directed by E.L. Katz and starring Samara Weaving. The story takes us into this nightmarish apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic world where this biblical event, the rapture, has occurred, after which humanity has descended into this barbaric state of cultish madness and survival. I thought the best parts of the film occurred in the first act. You have this nightmarish forest setting, and the relentless pacing of it all really had me on the edge. I thought that Samara Weaving was great as the lead, Azrael, who is this lone survivor hunted by a fanatical cult that worships terrifying demonic creatures known as the Burned Ones. And also the lore here is kind of fascinating and asks the question, what if the event of the rapture wasn't salvation, but a mutation of humanity into something utterly horrifying? Although I really enjoyed the first act of this movie and found it very immersive, and I loved its stark, naturalistic vibe, by the time you get to the second and third acts of this film, it just started having diminishing returns for me, especially when Azrael's character transitions into more of this action heroine figure and is taking down all these enemies in this comic book style way that just felt a little inconsistent with that initial stark, gritty tone that I thought the film was going to go with. But then by the third act, it just goes completely cheesy and takes its biblical concept and theme and just jam-packs it with cheesy cliches that we've seen before in a gazillion other apocalyptic horror movies like this. And I just thought, the way it ended just undercut the tension and horror completely. Ultimately, Azrael was a mixed bag for me. The best thing about it was the way it takes this idea of the heavenly rapture and transforms it into this post-apocalyptic nightmare scenario. I dug that. That was really cool. It also crafts a very unsettling atmosphere that really sets the stage for this story of survival horror and sets the stage for this character. But like I said, by the time you get to the third act, it just becomes so cliched and in a way that just kind of deflates the horror in the movie and left me disappointed because I thought it had so much potential and, didn't really live up to that by the end of it. So, would I recommend this movie? Well, I think if you're a horror fan and it's streaming on Shudder and it's available, you already have access to it. I think there are elements that are admirable and that you can get into, particularly if you're a fan like me of the subgenre of post-apocalyptic horror. All right, so those are my thoughts on some of the horror movies currently streaming. Let me know if you've seen any of these titles, and please share your comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will look forward to bringing you some more reviews and content very soon here.